Martin's weathered hand trembled as he held the financial document under his desk lamp's amber glow. Victoria's unmistakable handwriting discussing their home's value and retirement accounts stared back at him. 40 years of trust cracked like dry wood. His coffee cooled, forgotten, as the grandfather clock ticked accusingly in the corner of his study. The leather chair, Eleanor's anniversary gift, creaked beneath him as he reached for their wedding photo. They stood before their first home, the one he'd built himself. Now, someone wanted to take it all. Has betrayal ever frozen you mid-breath? Share your story below, like if this moment hits home, and follow to see how Martin fights for what he built over a lifetime. A single tear fell onto the glass, blurring Eleanor's smiling face. Martin swallowed a sob as dinner dishes clinked in the kitchen. Footsteps approached. Quickly, he tucked the paper away, but the crack in his heart widened with each passing second. Martin's weathered hand trembled as he held the financial document under his desk lamp's amber glow. The familiar weight of his reading glasses couldn't sharpen away what his carpenter's eye had already caught: Victoria's unmistakable handwriting discussing their home's value and retirement accounts. His coffee sat forgotten on the corner of the oak desk he'd crafted 4 decades ago. 40 years of trust, cracked like dry wood. He blinked hard, but the betrayal remained stark on the page. The grandfather clock in the corner, Eleanor's anniversary gift to him, ticked away seconds that suddenly felt precious, stolen. Outside the study window, evening settled over the garden where Eleanor should be tending her roses. Instead, she was having lunch with Victoria for the 3rd time this week. "Can't be right," he whispered, voice catching on the final word. His calloused fingers reached for their wedding photo, the silver frame cool against his skin. They stood proud before their first home, the one he'd built with his own hands, Eleanor laughing as he carried her across the threshold. The memory stung like sawdust in fresh cuts. A single tear splashed onto the glass, blurring Eleanor's smiling face. Martin wiped it away with his thumb, leaving a smudge that bothered his craftsman's precision. He'd always been the fixer, the builder, the one who made things solid and true. Now the foundation was shifting beneath him. In the quiet room where he'd helped grandchildren with science projects and balanced family accounts for decades, Martin felt something inside him crack. His chest tightened as he tried to swallow the sob building there. The sound that escaped was foreign to his ears, small and wounded. Not my Eleanor. Not after all these years. His eyes returned to the document, narrowing at details that shouldn't exist. Transfer inquiries, home equity questions, asset liquidation options. All in Victoria's flowing script, with notes about her financial advisor, who could help Eleanor secure her future. Martin's hand pressed against his chest as if physically holding his heart together. The walls of his study, lined with bookshelves he'd built during his first year of retirement, seemed to close in around him. Dust motes danced in the fading light, silent witnesses to his discovery. He carefully returned the paper to its envelope, craftsman's hands precise even in distress. 40 years of marriage taught observation before reaction. The slight tremble remained, but determination steadied his fingers as he slipped the evidence into his desk drawer. The floorboard near the door creaked, the one he'd always meant to fix. Martin quickly wiped his eyes with a weathered handkerchief, composing himself as footsteps approached. "Martin, are you coming down for dinner?" Eleanor's voice carried up the hallway. He straightened his shoulders, a lifetime of quiet strength reasserting itself. "Be right there, darlin'." Morning light filtered through the bedroom curtains Eleanor had sewn when they first moved in. Martin lay still, watching her sleep. 30 minutes before the alarm would sound, a lifetime habit from construction days. His mind had churned through the night, building and dismantling theories like the houses he'd framed for 40 years. Eleanor's face looked peaceful, untroubled. Her silver hair caught the early light, reminding him of their first gray strands discovered together, laughing at the bathroom mirror. His hand hovered above her shoulder, not quite touching, hesitant in a way it had never been before. "Just getting old and suspicious," he muttered to himself, easing from the bed. The shower's steady rhythm masked Eleanor's humming as Martin slipped into her closet. A contractor's precision guided his search, methodical, careful not to disturb the order she maintained. Her purse sat on the shelf where she always left it. The wrongness of this invasion wasn't lost on him, but neither was yesterday's discovery. Inside, beneath lipstick and tissues, his fingers found a business card. Richard Grant, Westview Financial Planning. A date and time written on the back in Eleanor's neat script. Today at 11, when she'd told him she was meeting Victoria for lunch, the shower stopped. Martin returned everything exactly as he'd found it and retreated to the kitchen, hands steady enough to prepare coffee, though his insides trembled. Eleanor entered wearing a blouse he'd never seen, something silky and new. She kissed his cheek, the familiar scent of her shampoo momentarily washing away his doubts. "Sleep well?" she asked, accepting the coffee mug he offered. "Well enough." The lie felt strange in his mouth. In 40 years, they'd rarely kept secrets. "You were restless." Her eyes held concern, or was it wariness? Martin couldn't tell anymore, and that uncertainty cut deeper than the document had. "Old bones," he shrugged, forcing a smile. "That new blouse looks nice." "This? Just found it on the sales rack last week." Her fingers smoothed invisible wrinkles, avoiding his eyes. "I'm meeting Victoria for lunch today. Probably be gone most of the afternoon." Martin nodded, Carpenter's eyes catching the slight tell at the corner of her mouth, the same twitch that appeared when she'd tried to keep his 60th birthday party a surprise. "Any special occasion?" "Just catching up." She glanced at her watch, another new purchase she'd never explained. "What are your plans today?" "Thought I might check on our accounts at the bank. Been a while since I balanced everything." The coffee mug in Eleanor's hand paused halfway to her lips. Just a moment, so brief anyone else might have missed it. But Martin had spent a lifetime noticing the details others overlooked. "I took care of all that last week," she said, voice too casual. "Everything's fine." After she left, Martin sat at the computer in his study, the one their grandchildren had insisted they learn to use. His gnarled fingers, more accustomed to wood than keyboards, carefully navigated to their online banking page. The recent activity made his heart sink. A transfer of $20,000 from their joint savings to an account he didn't recognize, dated 3 days ago. His name was on the authorization, but he'd signed nothing. The room seemed suddenly cold, despite the spring warmth outside. Martin reached for the phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Frank, it's Martin. Got time for coffee today?" His voice sounded normal, steady, belying the storm inside. No woodworking questions this time." "Something else I need your eyes on." The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the quiet room as he set down the phone. Through the window, he watched Eleanor's car back out of the driveway, turn left instead of right toward Victoria's house. "Where are you really going, Eleanor?" he whispered to the empty room. Martin's truck idled across the street from Westview Plaza, a gleaming glass building that seemed to mock the weathered storefronts of their small town. His hands, steady enough to cut dovetail joints blindfolded, gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. Eleanor's car sat 4 spaces from the entrance, unmistakable with the dent in the rear fender he'd been meaning to fix. "Lunch with Victoria," he murmured, the words bitter on his tongue. Through the lobby windows, he glimpsed 3 figures at the reception desk. Eleanor's blue blouse, Victoria's blonde bob, and a man in a tailored suit. Too far to see faces, but body language spoke volumes. The man's hand touched Eleanor's elbow, guiding her toward the elevator. Too familiar, too practiced. Enough spying like some jealous teenager, he told himself, pulling away before he could be spotted. Back home, the quiet house felt like a stranger's. Martin moved through it with new awareness, seeing not the comfortable rooms they'd shared for decades, but potential assets on some hidden balance sheet. The kitchen where they'd raised children, the living room where grandchildren now played, the garden Eleanor had cultivated for 40 years, all reduced to dollar figures in Victoria's flowing script. His steps carried him to Eleanor's desk in the sunroom. They'd never locked things away from each other. No need, until now. The wrongness of it tightened his throat as he eased open the drawer. Methodical as ever, Martin carefully lifted each item, memorizing its exact position. Beneath a stack of garden catalogs, he found it, a folder labeled Financial Planning in Eleanor's handwriting. Inside, what he'd feared, home valuation documents, retirement account statements, and preliminary paperwork for a reverse mortgage application. All dated within the past month. But it was the yellow notepad that stopped his breath. Victoria's handwriting again, listing names beside dollar amounts. Judith Wilson, $8,500. Margaret Thomas, $12,000. Frank's sister-in-law, potential. And at the bottom, underlined, Henderson, biggest commission yet? Martin's hands shook so badly the papers rustled. Frank's sister-in-law, the woman who'd lost half her savings in some investment scheme last year. The coincidence was too perfect. He took photos with the smartphone his grandchildren had insisted he learn to use, carefully replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, and made his way to the garden bench he'd built for their 30th anniversary. The carved hearts on the armrests mocked him now. Spring flowers nodded in the afternoon breeze, oblivious to how the world had shifted. For 40 years he'd built things to last. Homes, furniture, a marriage. Now he sat surrounded by Eleanor's roses, wondering if their foundation had always had this fatal flaw, invisible until the weight became too much. A tear tracked down his weathered cheek, dropping onto the stone path. He didn't bother wiping it away. No one to see, no one to hide from out here among the blooms that had witnessed their happiest moments. The crunch of gravel in the driveway jolted him upright. Car doors slammed, 2 of them. Women's voices, laughing. Eleanor and Victoria returning together, keeping up appearances. Martin slipped the phone with its damning photos into his pocket and stood, steadying himself against the bench. His carpenter's mind was already measuring, assessing, planning his response. There would be no confrontation today, not until he understood the full blueprint of this betrayal. Gravel crunched closer as the women rounded the corner of the house, still deep in conversation. "Martin!" Victoria's voice held false warmth. "What a lovely surprise. I was just bringing Eleanor home from our lunch." His eyes met Eleanor's briefly, catching the flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? Before she looked away. "Afternoon, ladies," he managed, decades of dealing with difficult clients lending steadiness to his voice. "Beautiful day for gardening. You're sure you don't mind if Richard joins us?" Eleanor adjusted her earrings, new ones Martin hadn't seen before, as they waited in Victoria's ornate foyer. "He's been so helpful with Victoria's finances since her divorce." "Not at all." Martin kept his voice neutral, his face composed. 40 years in construction had taught him to inspect a foundation thoroughly before declaring it unsound. Tonight was about gathering evidence, not confrontation. Victoria's home had transformed since her divorce last year. Gone were the family photos and comfortable furniture, replaced by sleek, expensive pieces that seemed designed to impress rather than welcome. Like the woman herself, Martin thought. All new surface hiding something underneath. "Martin, Eleanor, come in, come in." Victoria swept into the foyer in a dress that must have cost a month of Martin's pension. "Richard just arrived. Such perfect timing." Richard Grant stood in the dining room, younger than Martin expected, perhaps early 50s, with the practiced smile of a man who sold things for a living. His handshake was firm, his eye contact briefly assessing Martin before dismissing him to focus on Eleanor. "Eleanor has told me so much about you," Richard said, the pleasantry hollow. "Funny," Martin replied, smiling easily. "She hasn't mentioned you at all." A flicker of something crossed Richard's face before his smile reset. Victoria laughed too loudly, steering them toward the dining table already set with china Martin hadn't seen since her husband left. "Richard has been an absolute lifesaver," Victoria announced, pouring wine into crystal glasses. "After Thomas left me with such a financial mess, Richard helped me secure my future." "And you're looking to secure Eleanor's future, too?" Martin asked mildly. The momentary silence was answer enough. "We're just exploring options," Eleanor said quickly. "At our age, it's important to be prepared." Martin nodded, taking a deliberate sip of wine. "Couldn't agree more. Always good to understand exactly what you're getting into." Through appetizers, Martin watched the trio's dynamics with a craftsman's attention to detail. Richard directed most conversation to Eleanor, speaking slightly louder than necessary, as if Martin might be hard of hearing. Victoria reinforced everything Richard said while subtly undermining any comment Martin made. Eleanor sat between worlds, occasionally glancing at Martin with an expression he couldn't quite read. "So, Richard," Martin said during a lull, "how long have you been in financial planning?" 15 years. I specialize in retirement security," Richard answered smoothly, "particularly for women who find themselves handling finances later in life. Like Victoria's friends, Judith Wilson and Margaret Thomas?" Martin kept his tone conversational. Richard's fork paused briefly. "I don't discuss other clients." "Of course not. Professional ethics." Martin nodded. "I was just curious, since Frank Miller mentioned his sister-in-law had worked with a financial advisor recently. Lost quite a bit, unfortunately." Victoria's wine glass clinked against her plate. "Different advisor, I'm sure. Richard is very selective about his clients." "And his clients' assets?" Martin smiled. "Like our home, the one I built myself 40 years ago." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Martin." "I noticed the valuation paperwork," he continued calmly. "Thorough job. Though they missed the foundation reinforcement I added after the '98 earthquake. Adds considerable value." The silence stretched taut as a level line. "Always the builder," Eleanor finally said, attempting lightness. "Always thinking about the details." "Details matter in construction," Martin replied. "Overlook something small, and eventually, the whole structure can collapse." After dinner, Richard insisted on giving Martin a tour of Victoria's new backyard landscaping, man to man, while the women cleared dishes. In the shadowed garden, Richard's demeanor shifted. "Eleanor seems concerned about your reluctance to consider new financial strategies," he said. "At your age, flexibility is important." Martin studied the younger man. "My father worked until he was 86. Built furniture people still use today." "Different times," Richard dismissed. "Today's economy requires expert guidance. Eleanor understands that." "Does she understand your success rate? The complaints filed against you in Redwood County last year?" Richard's smile vanished. "I don't know what you think you know." "I know foundations," Martin interrupted quietly. "I know when one is sound and when it's compromised. I know the difference between actual support and something that just looks good until pressure is applied." Back inside, Martin watched Eleanor laughing at something Victoria said, her face animated in a way it hadn't been at home for months. His heart ached at the distance that had grown between them without his noticing, board by board, until they stood on opposite sides of a chasm. Later, in their darkened bedroom, Eleanor's voice came softly. "You were quiet on the drive home." Martin stared at the ceiling, thinking of the evidence accumulating in his workshop, the calls he'd made to Frank and his retired detective friend, the pieces fitting together with craftsman's precision. Just thinking about foundations, he answered, and what it takes to repair them. Dad, you can't be serious. Lisa's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the glass tabletop in her modernist dining room. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the distance between them. Not just the table, but the gulf between his world and hers. Martin sat straight-backed in an uncomfortable chair that probably cost more than his first car. His evidence folder lay open between them, thinner than it had been that morning. Key documents missing. Eleanor must have found his copies. I know how it sounds, he admitted, voice steady despite the hollowness in his chest. But I've seen the papers, Lisa.
Withdrawal authorizations I never signed. Home valuation documents. Victoria's notes about commissions. And you've misplaced the most important evidence.
Lisa exchanged a glance with her husband James that Martin recognized immediately, the look people share when discussing an elderly relative's confusion. I had it yesterday. Martin's fingers spread across the folder, Carpenter's hands that had never failed him now unable to produce what he needed most. Your mother must have found where I kept them. Lisa sighed, the sound carrying decades of daughterly concern wrapped in adult impatience. Dad, Mom called me last week. She's worried about you. Says you've been secretive, going through her things. The betrayal struck deeper than he'd expected. Eleanor had called their daughter first, framing him as the problem, setting up the narrative before he could speak his truth. She's being manipulated, Martin insisted, leaning forward. Victoria's friend Richard has complaints against him for targeting seniors. They're after our home, Lisa, the one I built with my own hands. Mom says you've been controlling the finances for 40 years, and she finally wants some independence. Lisa's voice softened with practiced sympathy. It's not unusual for people your age to struggle with changing roles. People my age. The words fell heavy between them. When had he transformed from dad to people your age in his daughter's eyes? We're just concerned. James finally spoke, his corporate diplomacy smoothing the edges of what was really being said. Sometimes as we get older, changes can seem threatening when they're really just adjustments. Martin looked between them, his accomplished daughter and her executive husband, their faces showing nothing but rehearsed concern. They'd already decided. Whatever he said now would only confirm their diagnosis. Elderly paranoia, confusion, control issues. His shoulders, which had carried roof beams and family burdens for decades, slumped almost imperceptibly. I see. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Winters, Lisa suggested gently. He helped Mrs. Patterson when she was having similar concerns. Similar concerns, as if his discovery of actual documents was equivalent to their elderly neighbor's conviction that the mail carrier was stealing her catalogs. I'll think about it, Martin lied, closing the folder with hands that wanted to tremble but refused. Outside, spring sunshine mocked his darkening world. Martin walked 3 blocks before realizing he had no destination in mind. His feet carried him to Roosevelt Park, where he'd taught Lisa to ride a bike 35 years ago, the same park where he'd later taught her children. He sat heavily on a bench, the folder clutched in his weathered hands. A young mother pushed a stroller past, offering a smile he couldn't return. His world was collapsing around him, and strangers still smiled as if everything was normal. When the first tear fell, Martin was surprised by it. He hadn't cried since his father's funeral 12 years ago. Now they came silently, one after another, dropping onto the manila folder like rain. 40 years of marriage, a home built with his own hands, a daughter who now looked at him with concerned condescension instead of trust, all crumbling at once. Mind if I join you? Martin looked up, hastily wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. An elderly man stood nearby, well-dressed, perhaps a few years older than Martin himself. Free country, Martin managed, embarrassed at being caught in such a moment. The man sat with a grunt that spoke of aging joints, and nodded at the folder. Bad news? Family matters, Martin replied automatically. Ah. The man nodded as if this explained everything. They didn't believe you, did they? Martin turned, really seeing the stranger for the first time. Excuse me? Happened to me last year. Financial advisor my daughter found. Said he was helping organize my estate for my benefit. The man shook his head. By the time my son figured out what was happening, half my savings was gone, and when I tried to tell my daughter, she thought I was confused, aging parent and all that. Martin stared, words momentarily failing him. Name's Walter, the man said, extending a hand. Walter Prescott. And I'd bet good money, what I have left of it anyway, that your folder there has something to do with someone named Richard Grant. Has someone you trusted dismissed your concerns as just being paranoid or confused? Share your experience in the comments, like if this painful moment resonates with you, and follow for Martin's path from heartbreak to vindication. Will his own family ever see the truth? How did you know? Martin asked, voice barely above a whisper. Because you're not the first, and sadly, you won't be the last. Walter sighed. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Martin looked down at the tear-stained folder, then back at Walter's knowing eyes. For the first time since finding that document in Eleanor's desk, he felt something other than betrayal and despair. He felt the first flicker of hope. Frank Miller's garage workshop smelled of sawdust and motor oil, a comforting blend that reminded Martin of decades working side by side on construction sites. Tools hung in precise order on pegboards, a system Martin had taught him 30 years ago. 2 mugs of coffee steamed on the workbench, black and strong enough to stand a spoon in, just as they'd always taken it. Jesus, Marty. Frank set down the folder containing everything Martin had gathered, the photos of documents, Walter Prescott's statement, notes from their discreet inquiries about Richard Grant. You sure about all this? Martin nodded, watching his oldest friend's face. Frank was the first person who'd actually listened without that patronizing look of concern. Eleanor doesn't know I have copies. She found the originals in my desk, but not the ones I kept in the workshop. Smart, Frank nodded approvingly. Always were the careful one. Not careful enough. Martin's voice caught. Should have seen it happening. Victoria started coming around more after her divorce, always whispering with Eleanor. New clothes, new jewelry. I thought Eleanor was just helping her through a rough time. Frank's weathered face hardened. Victoria. Should have known she was involved when Margaret lost her savings. And now you say she approached my sister-in-law? She's on Victoria's list. Potential target. Martin tapped the photo of the yellow notepad. But that's not even the worst part. Look at these authorization forms. That's supposed to be my signature, but I never signed anything. Frank studied the documents, squinting through reading glasses that matched Martin's own. Forgery. That's criminal, Marty. Try proving it. Lisa already thinks I'm losing it. Told me to see a doctor about my concerns. The memory of his daughter's condescension still stung. Eleanor called her first, set the stage. Damn. Frank shook his head slowly. Eleanor really involved in this. Hard to believe after 40 years. Martin stared into his coffee. I don't think she understands what's really happening. Richard's convincing her it's about financial independence, securing her future. But Victoria, his hand tightened around the mug. Victoria knows exactly what she's doing. Frank leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking in protest. My cousin's still with the banking commission, and Mike Wilson just retired from the fraud division last year. We should talk to them. For the first time in weeks, Martin felt something loosen in his chest. Frank believed him. No questions about his memory or his stability, just immediate acceptance and practical next steps. Thank you, Martin said simply. Frank waved it away. Known you since high school, Marty. You've never made accusations without evidence. Not starting now. He picked up his phone. Let me call Mike. He'll know how to handle this. While Frank made the call, Martin wandered the familiar workshop, running his fingers over the cabinets they'd built together when Frank's granddaughter was born. 15 years ago now. The wood had aged beautifully, just as good work should. Mike can see us tomorrow morning, Frank announced. Says to bring everything we've got. And Marty, he's seen this before. This Richard character has a pattern.
You're not the first. Walter Prescott said the same thing. Martin returned to the workbench. But I need more than just my word against theirs. I need concrete proof that can't be dismissed. Then let's find it. Frank spread a clean sheet of paper on the workbench. Start from the beginning. When did you first notice something was off? For the next 3 hours, they meticulously reconstructed the timeline, identifying gaps and potential evidence sources. Frank's cousin at the Banking Commission agreed to discreetly check for other complaints against Westview Financial. Mike Wilson provided a list of questions that would help build a case for the authorities. Martin felt himself standing straighter with each passing hour. The craftsman in him recognized the familiar rhythm of problem-solving. Identify the issue, gather the right tools, develop a plan, execute with precision. We need to move quickly, Frank said, as afternoon light began to fade. If they're pushing Eleanor to transfer the house deed, that's the point of no return. I can't confront Eleanor yet. Martin ran a hand through his silver hair. Not until I have enough evidence that she can't dismiss it. What about Lisa? Frank asked. Think she'll listen with more proof? Martin thought about the look his daughter had exchanged with her husband. Maybe, but I need something irrefutable, something that proves I'm not just a confused old man. You're the least confused person I know, Marty. Frank gripped his shoulder firmly. Always have been. The simple validation nearly undid him. Martin blinked rapidly, fighting back the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. One more thing, Frank said, opening a drawer. I want you to take this. He handed Martin a small digital recorder. Mike suggested it. Legal in our state as long as you're part of the conversation. Next time you're with Richard or Victoria, get them talking. Martin turned the device over in his hands, the builder in him appreciating its elegant simplicity. Smart. We'll figure this out, Frank promised. They picked the wrong old guys to mess with. Driving home, Martin rehearsed normalcy. Eleanor would ask about his day. He would mention coffee with Frank, woodworking discussions. The partial truth that had become necessary in a marriage built on 40 years of complete honesty. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he pulled into the driveway, he noticed Eleanor in the garden, phone to her ear, gesturing animatedly. She hadn't seen him yet. Through the car window, Martin watched his wife of 40 years, the woman who had held his hand through every hardship, who had raised children with him, who knew every line on his face and story behind it. A stranger now, with secrets between them. Eleanor turned, spotting his truck. Her hand dropped, ending the call abruptly. She waved, smile too bright, too rehearsed. Martin waved back, recorder heavy in his pocket. Tomorrow, they would begin gathering real evidence. Tonight, he would continue the painful charade, watching the woman he loved perform her own version of the same play. How was your day? Eleanor asked as he approached. Productive, Martin answered truthfully. Very productive. Morning light streamed through the blinds of Mike Wilson's home office, illuminating decades of law enforcement commendations on the walls. The retired detective studied the evidence spread across his desk with the same methodical focus that had solved homicides for 30 years. You've done good groundwork, Mike said finally, looking up at Martin and Frank. Better than most professionals I've worked with. Martin nodded, accepting the compliment without pride. Precision had always been necessary in his work. The difference between a house that lasted generations and one that failed in the first storm.
But is it enough? He asked. Mike leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his substantial frame. For the authorities to act immediately? No. For a civil case eventually? Probably. For convincing your wife and daughter? That depends. On what? Frank asked. On how deep Eleanor is in this? Mike tapped the financial documents. These transfers required her signature and yours, or a forgery of yours. We need to establish if she knowingly participated in fraud or if she's being manipulated. The question had haunted Martin for weeks. She's being manipulated, he said firmly. Eleanor wouldn't deliberately hurt our family. Mike nodded, respecting Martin's certainty without fully sharing it. Then our job is to get enough evidence to break through whatever story they've built around her. How? Martin asked. Confrontation. Mike held up a hand as Martin began to protest. Not just you alone, a controlled setting with witnesses. We present the evidence simultaneously to Eleanor, Victoria, and this Richard character. Watch their reactions. Record everything legally. Frank nodded approvingly. Like those TV shows where they get all the suspects in one room. Something like that. Mike smiled briefly. But this isn't about trapping Eleanor. It's about showing her the truth so clearly that she can't deny it. Martin considered this, Carpenter's mind assessing structural integrity. I need Lisa there too. My daughter. She needs to see for herself. Family dinner, Frank suggested. Your house, your territory, everyone together. Not my house, Martin said, thinking strategically. Neutral ground, a restaurant private room. Somewhere they'll feel comfortable, less defensive. Mike nodded appreciatively. Smart. Public enough they won't make a scene, private enough for honest conversation. For the next hour, they crafted the plan with the precision Martin would give to a complex building project. Mike and Frank would be nearby but not initially visible. The evidence would be presented in a specific sequence, designed to build an irrefutable case. Martin would lead the conversation, drawing out admissions without revealing his full knowledge until the right moment. What if Eleanor still doesn't believe me? The question slipped out, revealing Martin's deepest fear. Truth has weight, Mike said simply. It lands differently than lies. I've seen hardened criminals crumble when faced with irrefutable facts. Eleanor isn't a criminal. She's your wife. Martin wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. 40 years together had to count for something. One more thing, Mike added, sliding a small device across the desk. Wear this. Better quality than Frank's recorder, and it transmits to my phone. We'll hear everything in real time. Martin picked up the button-sized microphone. Another piece of deception, necessary to uncover a greater one. Later, at home, Martin stood before the bathroom mirror adjusting his tie, the blue one Eleanor had given him for their 40th anniversary. The face staring back at him looked older than it had a month ago. New lines carved by betrayal and determination. Standing up against betrayal takes courage at any age. Have you ever had to fight to protect what's yours? Comment your experience, like if you admire Martin's methodical approach, and follow to witness the confrontation that changes everything. Will his careful planning reveal the truth his family refused to see? His fingers, still nimble despite arthritis, secured the microphone behind his tie clip. Tomorrow evening would change everything, for better or worse. The foundation he'd built his life upon would either be reinforced or revealed as fatally flawed. A soft knock at the bathroom door startled him. Martin? Eleanor's voice came through. I picked up your blue shirt from the cleaners for tomorrow night. The one Lisa always says brings out your eyes. His heart clenched at the ordinary kindness from the woman who might be betraying him, or being betrayed herself. Thank you, he managed. That was thoughtful. A pause. Is everything all right? You've been quiet lately. Martin studied his reflection, wondering if she could see the weight he carried. Just thinking about tomorrow's dinner. looking forward to having everyone together. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, it'll be nice. Her footsteps retreated down the hallway. Martin braced his hands against the sink, steadying himself. One more day of pretense. One more day of watching the woman he loved move through their home like both wife and stranger. Tomorrow, the truth, whatever it was, would finally have its moment. Martin straightened his shoulders and opened the door. The hallway stretched before him, lined with photographs documenting a lifetime together. Wedding day. First home. Children's birthdays. Grandchildren's arrivals. 40 years of shared history, leading to this moment of division. He touched the microphone hidden beneath his tie, feeling its small, hard presence against his chest. Let's finish this, he whispered to himself, and headed downstairs to call Lisa and confirm tomorrow's arrangements. The private dining room at Bellamy's cast a warm glow over its occupants, crystal glasses catching light from the chandelier overhead. Martin sat at the head of the table, outwardly calm despite the thundering pulse in his ears. Eleanor to his right, Lisa and James across from her. Victoria and Richard had just arrived, completing the tableau. What a lovely surprise, Victoria exclaimed upon seeing Richard already seated. I didn't realize you'd be joining us, Richard. The practiced surprise didn't reach her eyes. Martin noted the exchange of glances between them. Too familiar, too coordinated. I invited him, Martin said pleasantly. Thought it was time we all got better acquainted, given his involvement with our family finances. Eleanor's hand tightened around her water glass. Martin, we discussed waiting. For what, darlin'? Martin asked, the endearment both genuine and pointed. Seems to me decisions are being made. Important ones. Thought the whole family should be involved. Lisa shifted uncomfortably, exchanging looks with her husband. Dad, is this really an appropriate time? Martin finished for her. I believe it is. Don't you, Richard? Richard adjusted his silk tie, confidence momentarily wavering before reinstating his professional smile. I'm always happy to discuss financial planning with family members. It's actually recommended. Excellent, Martin interrupted, opening the folder beside his plate. Then let's discuss. He laid out the first document, a printout of their joint account showing the unauthorized transfers. Starting with these withdrawals, I never approved. The table fell silent. Eleanor stared at the paper, color draining from her face. There must be some mistake, Victoria said quickly. Eleanor mentioned you've been having trouble keeping track. No mistake. Martin's voice remained steady as he placed a second document beside the first, a bank verification that his signature had been deemed questionable. The bank's fraud department found it interesting too. Richard cleared his throat. Financial management can be complex. Perhaps in the confusion of everyday paperwork. I've managed construction projects worth millions. Martin cut in. Never once confused about who signed what. Lisa leaned forward, attorney's eyes scanning the documents. Dad, where did you get these? I kept copies, Martin replied simply. After I found the originals in your mother's desk. After they mysteriously disappeared from my workshop. Eleanor's eyes met his, something like fear flickering in them. Martin, please. Please what, Eleanor? He held her gaze. Please don't mention the home valuation documents, the reverse mortgage applications, Victoria's notes about commissions on vulnerable seniors. He laid each item on the table as he named it, photographs of documents Eleanor thought were gone forever. Victoria's composure cracked. Those are private business records, including this list. Martin placed the enlarged photo of Victoria's yellow notepad. Judith Wilson, Margaret Thomas, Frank's sister-in-law, all seniors who lost money after meeting with Richard. All connected to you, Victoria. Lisa gasped, picking up the photo. Mom, What is this? It's not what it looks like, Eleanor began, but her voice lacked conviction. It's exactly what it looks like, came a voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see Frank and Mike Wilson entering, followed by Walter Prescott and two other elderly individuals Martin recognized from Victoria's list. Finder's fees, Walter said, pointing at Victoria. She gets paid to introduce financially vulnerable seniors to Richard here. I lost $40,000 before my son figured it out. $60,000 in my case, said the woman beside him. My children still think I mismanaged it myself. Richard stood abruptly. This is harassment. I'm leaving. Sit down, Mr. Grant, Mike said, his decades of police authority evident in his tone. The Banking Commission representatives would like to join us. They're very interested in your pattern of behavior across 3 counties. 2 professionally dressed individuals entered, bearing folders thicker than Martin's. The color drained from Richard's face as he slowly sank back into his chair. Eleanor, Martin said softly, turning to his wife. Did you know about the others? Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. No. Victoria said Richard helped her after the divorce, said I needed my own financial security, independence, that you'd controlled everything for 40 years and… She stopped, realizing what she'd been led to believe. And what? Martin prompted gently. That men your age often hide financial problems from their wives, that I needed protection in case something happened to you. A tear slipped down her cheek. She said you'd be angry if you knew I was taking control, that you'd see it as an insult to your pride. Victoria stood, gathering her purse. This is absurd. I simply introduced friends to my financial advisor. For percentages noted on this list, Martin countered, tapping the photograph. A list that includes my wife's name with biggest commission yet beside it. You targeted my parents? Lisa's professional composure shattered as she stared at Victoria. After 40 years of friendship? Not friendship, Martin corrected quietly. Opportunity. The truth hung in the air, undeniable now, even to those who had dismissed it before. Eleanor reached for Martin's hand across the table, her fingers trembling. I never signed anything authorizing those transfers. I thought they were normal account adjustments you'd approved. The signature is a forgery, one of the banking representatives confirmed. We've compared it with samples from Mr. Henderson, definitely not authentic. Which is fraud, Mike added. Criminal fraud. Richard's confident facade crumbled entirely. Victoria handled those documents. I never… Don't you dare, Victoria hissed. This was your system from the beginning. As they turned on each other, Martin watched 40 years of trust beginning its slow, painful reconstruction in Eleanor's eyes. Across the table, Lisa's expression held shame and dawning understanding. Dad, she whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. Martin nodded, acceptance in the gesture if not yet in his heart. That would take time. Eleanor's fingers tightened around his. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, voice breaking. I thought I was protecting us both. I know, Martin replied softly. And he did know. Despite everything, he recognized the woman beside him. Not the conspirator he had feared, but the partner who had been manipulated by a predator, targeting the most precious thing they shared, trust built over 40 years. As the banking representatives began formal proceedings against Richard and Victoria, Martin watched the future taking shape, changed, scarred, but not destroyed. Like a house after weathering a terrible storm, damaged but standing, ready to be repaired by hands that knew its every beam and board. After all, that had always been his specialty, building things to last. Evening settled over the back porch, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and gold. Martin sat on the swing he'd built when they first bought the house, the gentle creak of chains marking time like a metronome. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation at Bellamy's. 3 weeks of careful rebuilding. Richard faced criminal charges, his license revoked pending multiple investigations. Victoria had left town after other victims came forward. Her carefully constructed social standing collapsed like a house built on sand. The home Martin had built with his own hands remained theirs, the papers for its transfer now evidence in a fraud case instead. The screen door opened behind him. Eleanor stepped out, 2 mugs of coffee in hand, his black, hers with cream. Small rituals preserved despite everything. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. The question weighted with more than its simple words. "I'd like that," Martin answered truthfully. She settled beside him, leaving a small space between them. Not the comfortable closeness of before, but not the distant strangers they'd become either. Progress measured in inches. They rocked in silence, watching twilight deepen across the garden Eleanor had tended for decades. Her roses were blooming again, survivors of neglect during the weeks when deception had consumed their attention. "Lisa called today," Eleanor said finally. "She and James are bringing the grandkids this weekend." Martin nodded. "Good. The workshop's been too quiet." Another silence, comfortable enough to rest in, but too fragile to test with weight. "I keep thinking about what Victoria said during the investigation," Eleanor ventured. "About how easy it was. How she looked for people who'd been together so long they'd stopped seeing changes in each other." She stared into her coffee. She was right about that part. "I stopped seeing you clearly somewhere along the way." Martin considered this, Carpenter's mind measuring the truth in her words. "Works both ways. I didn't notice when you started feeling invisible. Didn't see you needed more acknowledgement than I was giving." "That doesn't excuse what happened." "No," he agreed, "but understanding the cracks helps with the repairs." Eleanor's hand found his, hesitant at first, then settling with familiar warmth. "Are we repairable, Martin?" The question hung between them, honest in a way they hadn't been with each other for too long. Martin turned to look at her, really look at her. The silver hair he'd watched gradually replace auburn over decades. The laugh lines around eyes that had witnessed every important moment of his adult life. The hands that had held babies, planted gardens, and built a life alongside his. "You know what my father taught me about woodworking?" he said finally. "That the strongest repairs often come from addressing the break directly. No hiding it, no pretending it didn't happen. You add new supports, sometimes visible ones. The piece is different after, but often stronger where it was broken." "Is that what we're doing? Adding visible supports?" Martin nodded. Those weekly meetings with the counselor, the new joint account reviews, Lisa coming around more often, all supports while the bond strengthens again. Eleanor's fingers tightened around his. "I was so ashamed when I realized what they'd done, what I'd let them do by not talking to you directly." "And I was terrified," Martin admitted, the confession easier now than it would have been before. "Not just of losing our home or savings, of losing us. 40 years, Eleanor. That's not something you replace or rebuild from scratch." A tear slipped down Eleanor's cheek, catching the last light of day. "No, it isn't." Above them, stars began to appear, the same constellations they'd watched from this porch through 4 decades of marriage. Martin thought about the photos lining their hallway. Wedding day, first home, children, grandchildren. A visual history of promises made and kept, despite human imperfection. "We have time," he said softly. "Not as much as we once did, maybe, but enough." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, bridging the small gap between them. Not everything restored, but a beginning. Inside the house, the grandfather clock chimed 8 times, the sound carrying through the screen door. The clock Eleanor had given him for their anniversary, the one that had witnessed his first discovery of betrayal. Now it simply marked another evening spent together, another day navigated through the new landscape of their marriage. "I love you, Martin Henderson," Eleanor said quietly. "That never changed, even when everything else did." Martin put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. I love you too. Always have. They sat together as darkness fell completely, two silhouettes against the porch light. Not the same as they had been, perhaps not ever again, but still connected, still choosing each other after the hardest test of their 40 years. In his workshop tomorrow, Martin would begin work on a new project, a jewelry box for Eleanor, crafted from wood salvaged from their first headboard, replaced years ago but never discarded. Old materials repurposed into something new, carrying history within its grain. Like them. The porch swing creaked gently as they rocked, its rhythm as familiar as their heartbeats. Above them, stars continued their ancient patterns, witnesses to human struggles that seemed momentous and minute all at once. The night air carried the scent of Eleanor's roses, resilient blooms that returned season after season, weathering winter's trials to flower again. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Martin thought about the foundations he'd laid throughout his life, homes for families, furniture for generations, a marriage meant to last a lifetime, all requiring the same elements: honest assessment, quality materials, careful attention, and regular maintenance. Now, he said, we keep building. Isn't it something, folks, how a life built over decades can tremble with a single piece of paper? Martin's story might have started with that financial document in his study, but it's one many of us know by heart. That sick feeling when trust cracks like dry wood. The tears that come when someone you've loved for 40 years suddenly seems a stranger across the breakfast table. That moment when your wisdom, earned through a lifetime of paying attention, gets dismissed as confusion or paranoia. We've all sat in that quiet room, haven't we? Hearts heavy while the world keeps turning outside our windows. The grandfather clock ticking away minutes that suddenly feel precious, stolen. We've felt that terrible choice between confrontation and silence, knowing either path carries its own kind of pain. Carpenter or not, we recognize when foundations shift beneath us. But here's what I know for certain. The same hands that tremble with betrayal's first shock can steady themselves again. The eyes that blur with tears can eventually see with newfound clarity. The wisdom that others dismiss as getting old often turns out to be our most valuable tool, like Martin's attention to detail that spotted what others missed. Experience isn't a liability. It's a strength that younger folks haven't earned yet. Remember how Martin stood tall again? How he gathered his evidence with the same care he once used to join pieces of wood. There's a lesson there about dignity that can't be taken unless surrendered. About how friendship, real friendship, weathers storms instead of causing them. About how family can learn to see us clearly again, not as aging parents, but as people with valid concerns and voices worth hearing. Your porch swing might creak with different memories than Martin's. Your photographs might tell another story entirely. But that feeling of building something meant to last, a home, a marriage, a legacy, that's something we share. And the determination to protect it, to repair what's damaged instead of walking away, that comes from knowing how precious time truly is. Trust breaks. Hearts crack. But neither has to be the end of the story. Like a house after a storm, we stand, perhaps marked by what we've weathered, but still standing, still building, still worth every nail and board and hour of careful craftsmanship. That's a foundation no one can take from us.